When the canine suddenly broke free that morning, every keeper's hand froze in terror. Men shouted. Someone reached for a catch pole. Someone yelled, "Secure the dog!" But no one moved. Everyone knew the truth. No one could handle this canine. Not behaviorists, not keepers, not even his former military handler. Nobody could get within 10 FT of him without risking their life. Men who had spent their whole lives around high-drive animals stood frozen, gripping the wire mesh fence. Because in the middle of the open enclosure stood a military dog, once labeled untamable, a beast that had sent seasoned keepers to the infirmary. He had attacked every handler, broken through reinforced kennels, and shattered behavioral assessments in all the worst ways. This wasn't just any canine. They called him Shadow, the most dangerous military dog ever retired from service. For months, nobody could touch him. Nobody could calm him. Nobody could handle him. But today, something impossible was about to happen. A small girl, no more than 7, walked straight toward him. "Get her out of there!" someone shouted. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply took one calm step forward, and then another. The canine lunged. Men yelled in panic. Then the little girl did something shocking, something no one expected in just 3 seconds. And the dog that terrified grown men did something no one could explain. Stay with me because what this little girl did next will leave you absolutely speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The mist over the sanctuary always lifted slowly in the mornings, drifting lazily over the wire mesh fences and the wide open fields. But today, it hung in the air like a warning. The men leaning against the fence weren't talking, weren't laughing, weren't even moving. Their eyes were fixed on the massive Belgian Malinois pacing inside the containment pen, his claws scraping the concrete, his breath sharp, his body tense like a coiled spring ready to snap. His name was Shadow, a name once spoken with pride throughout the Special Forces K-9 unit, now whispered with fear across the sanctuary. Shadow wasn't just any K-9. He was the most infamous military K-9 the Corps had ever trained. He had passed every obstacle, every obedience test, every field scenario until everything changed. A single deployment had shattered him, turning discipline into unpredictability, loyalty into explosive aggression. 3 behaviorists had failed to control him. 2 keepers had been bitten. 1 handler had nearly been hospitalized. After that, the military made a painful decision. Shadow was unfit for service. But euthanizing him sparked arguments, emails, and heated meetings. Some believed he deserved another chance. Others insisted he was too dangerous to save. Finally, the compromise was made. Shadow would be sent miles away to a sanctuary specializing in impossible cases, a place where wild wolves, rogue cougars, and untamable dogs were given their final shot at redemption. But the men here quickly realized Shadow wasn't like the others. He wasn't wild. He wasn't feral. He was haunted. Every sudden noise made him snap around violently. Every shadow made him growl. Every command made him recoil or attack, as if the very air around him was filled with ghosts only he could see. "Stay back," one sanctuary keeper warned, gripping the fence with white knuckles as Shadow slammed against the gate with a furious bark. "This one ain't fixable," the head keeper, a grizzled man with a thick beard and weathered neck, shook his head slowly. "Every animal's fixable," he muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Another keeper spat into the dirt. "Not this one. That's a military dog gone bad." The words stung, hanging heavy in the air. Shadow wasn't a monster. He wasn't evil. He was broken. And nobody, not the military, not the behaviorists, not the sanctuary keepers, believed anyone could put the pieces back together. Nobody until the day a little girl stepped onto the sanctuary grounds. The morning sun stretched across the sanctuary as a dusty jeep rumbled toward the front gate. The sanctuary keepers barely paid attention. New workers came and went all the time. But the moment the jeep door opened, every man at the fence did a double take. A little girl, no older than 7, hopped out. Her brown ponytail bounced behind her, a small backpack strapped across her shoulders, far too clean for a place coated in dirt and danger. Her boots were small, her steps confident, and her bright green eyes scanned the sanctuary with the calm curiosity of someone entering a playground, not a rehabilitation center where wild animals were known to lash out. Behind her stepped her father, David, a quiet, hard-working man who had recently taken a sanctuary job to earn steady pay. He placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Stay close, Mia," he murmured. But Mia wasn't looking at him. She was staring straight ahead toward the fenced pen, where Shadow paced like a storm trapped in a cage. Keepers exchanged uneasy glances. "What's a kid doing here? David should know better. This place ain't safe for children." Yet Mia didn't seem bothered. As they walked past the enclosures and equipment sheds, she kept glancing toward Shadow's pen, her face unreadable. Not fear, not excitement. Something else. Something that made one of the keepers shift uncomfortably. When they reached the main office, the head keeper stepped out. "David," he said gruffly. "Didn't know you were bringing family?" David winced. Couldn't leave her alone at home today. "I'll keep her away from the pens. She won't be any trouble." But Shadow had already noticed her from across the yard. His head snapped toward the jeep. His growl deepened, his pacing faltered, his ears pulled forward. Dust puffed beneath his paws as he froze, staring at the small girl standing beside the office steps. Mia stopped too. Their eyes met across the wide dirt arena. A strange stillness settled over the sanctuary, as if the wind itself held its breath. The sanctuary keepers braced instinctively. Shadow never paused for anything. Not for men, not for commands, not for food. But he was frozen now, utterly still, watching that small girl with frightening intensity. David hurried Mia inside, unaware of the scene outside, but the keepers couldn't stop whispering. Why is he looking at her like that? Does he know her? That dog doesn't know anyone. He hates everyone. Yet the truth was already unfolding. Shadow didn't hate her. He wasn't growling. He wasn't pacing. For the first time since arriving at the sanctuary, Shadow was calm, and none of the men could understand why. The morning chill settled thick over the sanctuary, turning the dirt into a fine brown dust that clung to boots, fences, and the breath on every man's neck. The sanctuary keepers had circled around Shadow's pen for his daily behavioral test. Nothing special, just a routine drill, the head keeper insisted on. But nothing about Shadow was ever routine. Inside the enclosure, the Belgian Malinois tore back and forth like a bolt of living thunder. His paws churned clouds of dust, his muscles rippling, his teeth flashing each time he snapped at the air. Every man leaned cautiously against the wire mesh fence, careful to stay inches beyond his explosive reach. "Easy, boy. Settle down," one keeper muttered. Shadow responded with a vicious snarl that made the man jerk back. Nobody could handle him. Everybody knew it. But today, something else was about to happen. Something no one could have guessed. Across the yard, David walked out of the office, rubbing warmth into his arms. Beside him, tiny Mia bounced lightly on her feet, taking in the scene with the curiosity only a child could hold. She wasn't afraid of the shouting men, or the rattling fences, or the snarling dog that sent grown adults 2 steps back every few seconds. Her eyes went straight to Shadow. She lifted her little hand and pointed. "Daddy doggy." David tensed immediately. Stay here, he said quickly. Don't move from this spot, okay, Mia? But she wasn't listening. The same strange calm from earlier washed over her face, like she was watching something no one else could see. And before David could stop her, Mia slipped from his reach and began walking. Small step after small step, straight toward the training arena. Mia! David shouted, panic flooding his voice, head snapped toward the child. And Shadow! Shadow turned like a hurricane, changing direction. His eyes locked onto the girl. The keepers froze. Every man went silent. Then it happened fast and violent. Shadow charged. Dust erupted behind him. The ground shook under his weight. His teeth flashed white in the sun. His growl tore across the yard like thunder, ripping the sky open. Grab him! One man screamed. Cut him off, David! Get your kid! But nobody moved quickly enough. Shadow was too fast. Far too fast. He ripped across the enclosure, hit the edge of the fence, and before anyone could blink, the gate latch slipped loose from the earlier struggle. The gate flew open. Shadow was free, and he was running straight at Mia. David sprinted, but desperation had slowed his legs. Fear had taken the strength out of every keeper's knees. They all watched helplessly as the wild military dog barreled toward the tiny girl, dust exploding beneath him, jaws wide, legs stretching like he was built for this one single deadly moment. But Mia didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She simply kept walking forward with her small backpack bouncing behind her, her brown ponytail swaying gently in the cool wind, as if she were approaching a friendly family dog. Not a creature every adult there believed was seconds away from tearing her apart. Mia! David's voice cracked with terror, just as Shadow lunged, just as every keeper flinched, just as the dust cloud swallowed the two of them. Mia did something shocking. She lifted her small hand. A single soft gesture, a motion that stopped Shadow mid-lunge so abruptly his paws skidded trenches into the dirt. The furious bark caught in his throat. His growl died instantly. His chest heaved. His eyes, wild moments ago, softened as if he suddenly recognized something in her face. The keepers stared speechless. David staggered to a halt. Shadow, the uncontrollable, dangerous, untamable military dog, had frozen inches from a little girl's fingertips, and then, impossibly, he lowered his head. A stunned silence fell over the sanctuary, so heavy and absolute that even the wind seemed afraid to move. The dust settled slowly around Shadow and the little girl, drifting like brown mist between them. Every sanctuary keeper stood frozen behind the fence, eyes wide, mouths half open, their bodies locked in disbelief. Shadow wasn't growling, he wasn't snarling, he wasn't lunging, he was calm. The same dog who attacked handlers, snapped at poles, and smashed against fences now stood perfectly still before a 7-year-old girl, his ears tilted forward, his head lowered as if waiting for her next gesture. One man whispered, "What? What did she do?" Another shook his head. "Nothing. She just lifted her hand." "That's not possible," the headkeeper muttered, gripping the fence with both hands. "This dog doesn't respond to signals. He doesn't respond to anything." Mia took one small step forward. Shadow didn't move, only breathed, watching her with an intensity none of the men had ever seen from him. Not aggression, not fear, something deeper, something none of them understood. David rushed in, heart pounding so hard he thought his chest would split. He scooped Mia into his arms and backed away, legs trembling. "Don't you ever walk up to a dog like that again?" he whispered harshly, voice cracking. But Mia only rested her head against his shoulder and murmured. Doggy wasn't bad. The keepers exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe he was tired. Maybe she startled him. "No," the headkeeper said firmly. "That dog wasn't tired, and nothing about him said startled. He stopped like she stopped him. David's jaw clenched. He kissed the top of Mia's head and hurried away from the pen, his arms tightening protectively around her. Meanwhile, Shadow began pacing again, but this time it wasn't violent or frantic. His path followed the fence in slow, rhythmic steps, his eyes never leaving the direction Mia had been carried. A sanctuary keeper swallowed hard. "He's looking for her." "Why her?" someone whispered. "What's so special about that kid?" The headkeeper didn't answer. He couldn't because deep down he knew something was happening, something none of them were trained to understand. Shadow, the dog nobody could handle, had chosen someone, and that someone was a little girl. For the rest of the day, the sanctuary buzzed with restless whispers. Men who had worked with wild wolves, unpredictable cougars, and aggressive rescue dogs kept replaying the moment in their minds. The tiny girl standing firm, the raging dog freezing midair. It didn't make sense. It defied training, instinct, and nature. But to Mia, it was the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, David tried to keep her close, steering her toward the storage shed where he was assigned to organize supplies. "Stay right here," he said firmly, "and don't go near the pens." But sanctuaries are big, sheds are loud, and children wander. By the time David realized she was gone, Mia was already halfway across the yard, her little shoes kicking up dust as she headed straight toward Shadow's pen. Inside the enclosure, Shadow was pacing again, but not with the wild, frantic energy he'd shown before. His steps were slower, restless, like someone searching for something they'd lost. When his ears twitched, and he caught sight of Mia approaching, he stopped so abruptly that dirt slid beneath his paws. Mia pressed both tiny hands against the fence. Shadow moved toward her, not lunging, not snarling, but walking slowly, cautiously, tail lowered, head tilted with a strange, almost hopeful expression. A keeper nearly dropped his thermos. He's going to her on purpose. "No way," another whispered. Mia didn't flinch as Shadow approached. She waited patiently until his nose touched the metal bars. Then she giggled, a soft, innocent sound that didn't match the fear in every adult's chest. "Hi, doggy," she whispered. Shadow exhaled through his nose, a warm breath brushing across her fingers. He didn't snap. He didn't bark. He simply pressed closer, eyes softening, a look none of the men had ever witnessed from him. "Is she petting him?" one keeper choked. "Don't let her!" another shouted. But the headkeeper raised a hand sharply, halting everyone. "Wait!" Mia slid her hand through a gap in the fence and gently placed it on Shadow's cheek. The dog closed his eyes as if savoring a long-forgotten comfort. No growl, no tension, no rage, only stillness. David came sprinting across the yard, breathless. "Mia!" he called, panic strangling his voice. But when he saw the scene, his daughter calmly stroking the most dangerous dog at the sanctuary, his words died in his throat. Shadow opened his eyes and looked at David. He didn't snarl. He simply stepped back, allowing Mia's hand to fall away, almost respectfully, as if acknowledging that she belonged to someone who loved her. The headkeeper whispered, "That girl, she's the only one he trusts." Another man nodded. "It's like she's the key to whatever's broken inside him." But nobody understood why. Nobody knew the buried memory that flickered behind Shadow's eyes. Nobody knew the echo of a child he once tried to save. Nobody knew the bond already forming. A fragile, mysterious connection between a shattered military dog and a fearless little girl. Long after the sanctuary keepers finished whispering about Mia and Shadow. Long after David carried his daughter home with a mixture of fear and awe. Shadow lay in the corner of his enclosure, restless. His breathing was uneven, his ears flicking at sounds no one else could hear. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the sanctuary, and every shadow seemed to pull him backward into a place he desperately wished he could forget. It began with a distant echo. A helicopter, a child's cry, a handler shouting his name. Then the memories flooded back. Shadow had once been the pride of the K9 Corps, the fastest, most obedient Belgian Malinois they had ever trained. His partner, Sergeant Mike Evans, treated him like a brother. They worked seamlessly. Bomb detections, building clearances. Shadow trusted Mike, and Mike trusted Shadow with his life. But everything changed on a dusty afternoon 2 years ago. The mission came in just after noon. A hostile takeover, a child caught in the crossfire. The insurgents had fortified themselves inside a bombed-out schoolhouse. Reports said they were unstable, armed, and growing desperate by the minute. When Mike arrived with Shadow, the scene was chaos. Soldiers setting up perimeters, a negotiator shouting through a loudspeaker, gunfire echoing in the distance. Inside the dark schoolhouse, Shadow caught the scent first. A faint trace of fear, a child's fear. Mike whispered, "Easy, boy. We'll find them." The door splintered open. The world exploded. An insurgent grabbed the girl, no older than 7, and held her in front of him like a shield. She screamed, her tiny voice cracking with terror. Mike shouted demands, trying to de-escalate, but desperation made the man reckless. Then came the breaking moment. The man raised his weapon toward the child. Mike shouted the command, "Shadow, go!" The Belgian Malinois launched like a rocket. Everything that followed blurred into chaos. The weapon fired. The girl fell. The insurgent crashed to the floor beneath Shadow's weight. Mike lunged in, shouting for backup. But when Shadow turned toward the girl, he saw the blood, saw her small body trembling, saw her terrified eyes looking at him, pleading without words. And something inside Shadow shattered. Soldiers rushed in, medics pushed past. The insurgent was taken into custody. The girl survived, but her panicked cries, her shaking hands, her whisper of, "Don't let the dog near me," carved themselves into Shadow's memory with a pain deeper than any wound. He hadn't hurt her. He had saved her, but the fear in her eyes broke him. After that mission, Shadow changed. Commands confused him. Loud noises sent him into panic. Shadows made him lash out. And every time he saw a small child, every time he heard that high, trembling voice, his mind dragged him back to that room. That moment, that unbearable memory of the girl he couldn't comfort. The military tried retraining him, tried medication, tried everything. Nothing worked. Shadow wasn't dangerous by nature. He was traumatized, haunted, carrying a wound no one understood because no one had ever looked past the aggression to see the fear buried beneath. But here at the sanctuary, in the quiet moments between the mist and the wind, Shadow replayed the memory again and again until a new image flashed over it. Mia's face, her calm eyes, her tiny hand lifted gently. Her voice soft, steady, unafraid. She didn't flinch when he charged. She didn't tremble like the girl in the schoolhouse. She didn't see a monster. She saw him. For the first time since that terrible day, the memories loosened their grip. The darkness faded just enough for Shadow to breathe. Because Mia didn't remind him of fear, she reminded him of hope. David had always known the sanctuary was rough, unpredictable, and not a place for a child. But after seeing Mia stand inches from the most dangerous dog on the property, his heart hadn't stopped pounding. All night the image replayed in his mind. Shadow lunging, Mia raising a hand, the impossible calm that followed. The next morning he marched straight to the headkeeper's office, jaw tight, worry stiffening every step. "I need to know what's going on with that dog," he demanded. The keeper didn't answer right away. He closed the door, lowered his voice, and slid a thin file across the desk. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered. "But if your daughter is going to be anywhere near that animal, you deserve to know the truth." David hesitated, then opened the file. Shadow's military record stared back at him. Pages of glowing reports followed by a sudden sharp turn. Aggression, failed evaluations, emotional instability, violent responses to triggers. The words hit David like blows to the chest. "What happened to him?" David asked quietly. The keeper leaned back, arms folded. "A mission went wrong. A little girl was involved. Nearly died." His voice softened. "They say Shadow changed after that. They couldn't fix him." David felt a chill crawl up his spine. "So they sent him here to be rehabilitated." The keeper's silence was answer enough. David slammed the file shut. "So you're telling me my daughter was standing in front of a dog they almost put down?" "David," the keeper said carefully, "that girl is the only thing that dog responds to. Look outside." David turned to the window. Shadow was pacing his enclosure, but not with anger. His movements were restless, searching, his gaze repeatedly drifting toward the shed where Mia stood, helping a keeper fill water buckets. "He's looking for her," David whispered. The keeper nodded. "That dog should have attacked yesterday. Instead, he listened to your daughter. That's not training. That's something deeper." David swallowed hard, torn between fear and awe. Mia was just a child, sweet, innocent, fragile, and yet something inside her had reached into the broken parts of Shadow's soul and soothed them. But the thought gripped him with equal force. If Mia was the only one who could calm Shadow, then she was also the only one in danger if anything went wrong. David closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. He had to protect his daughter. He had to keep her safe. But in his heart, he already knew. Mia wasn't going to stay away from Shadow, and Shadow wasn't going to stay away from her. The sanctuary's training arena felt different that morning. The sky was clear, the air crisp, but tension rolled across the yard like a storm about to break. Sanctuary keepers gathered along the fence, whispering nervously. They all knew what today was. The head keeper, Mark, had decided it was time to re-establish control over Shadow. "This dog needs structure," Mark announced loudly as he strapped on protective sleeves. "He needs authority. He can't just pick a child and decide he listens only to her." The men nodded, though uneasily. Everyone had seen what happened the last time someone tried to force discipline onto Shadow. But Mark wasn't just any keeper. He had tamed wolves that broke bones, cougars that shattered gates. He believed experience could conquer anything, even Shadow. Shadow stood inside the arena, shoulders stiff, ears back, eyes locked on Mark, his body tensed with each step the keeper took. Mark raised his voice. "Sit!" Shadow didn't move. Mark stepped closer. "Sit!" Shadow growled deep in warning. The keepers braced instinctively. The air crackled with danger. "One wrong move and Mark would be another name," added to Shadow's list of injuries. "Back away, Mark," someone yelled. But Mark held his ground, pride tightening his jaw. No, he will obey. He must obey. He lifted the training baton, not to hit, but to signal authority. Shadow exploded. He lunged with a snarl that shook the posts of the arena. Mark jumped back, stumbling into the dirt as Shadow's claws tore trenches inches from his boots. The keepers shouted, scrambling for the gate. Some grabbing poles, others reaching for ropes. "Contain him. Mark, move!" Shadow's fury intensified, ears flat, teeth bared, tail rigid. He wasn't unpredictable now. He was in full protective mode, defending himself from a threat he believed was real. Mark scrambled backward, breath ragged, desperately trying to regain control. "Shadow, Stand down. But Shadow only pressed forward, ready to attack. Then a tiny voice pierced the chaos. Shadow. No. The commotion froze. Mia stood at the entrance of the arena, her backpack slipping off one shoulder, her eyes wide but fearless. Shadow halted mid-snarl, his chest heaved, his claws dug into the dirt, but he didn't advance another inch. The keepers froze in disbelief. Mark, still on the ground, stared at the little girl like she'd appeared from another world. Mia stepped closer, slow and steady. "It's okay," she whispered. "No one is hurting you." Shadow's ears lifted, his tail softened, his growl faded into a low whimper. He turned away from Mark and walked straight to Mia. The huge, wild, untamable military dog lowered his head beside her leg, pressing his muzzle into her tiny hand like a child seeking comfort. Mark pushed himself to his feet, shaken. This isn't training," he muttered. "This is impossible," one keeper swallowed hard. "He listens to her like she's his handler." Mark's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in realization. "That child," he whispered, "is the only one who can reach him." While the rest of the sanctuary buzzed with shock, disbelief, and quiet arguments about what they had just witnessed, one man stood apart from the group, leaning against the far fence, cap pulled low, eyes narrowed in a way that wasn't fear, but memory. His name was Ben, a keeper who rarely spoke and never interfered in anyone's business. Most men at the sanctuary barely noticed him. But today, Ben wasn't looking at Mark or Mia or David. He was staring at Shadow, not with confusion like the others, not with admiration, not even with fear, but with recognition. Shadow paced slowly inside the arena, pressing himself gently against Mia's side, occasionally nudging her hand as if making sure she was still there. Mia laughed softly, completely unaware of the dozens of stunned adults staring at her like she had performed a miracle. Ben's jaw tightened. He had seen this before. As the keepers dispersed to take a break, and Mark stormed back to his office, muttering about impossible dogs and impossible children, Ben stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the girl and the Belgian Malinois beside her. David noticed the silent man staring. "Something wrong?" he asked cautiously. Ben didn't answer at first. His gaze remained locked on Shadow, studying the dog's posture, the way he moved, the softness in his eyes, the same softness he had witnessed years ago on a very different day. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "That dog isn't dangerous the way you think." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Ben pushed off the fence, walking closer, the brim of his cap casting a shadow over his weathered face. "I've seen a dog look at a child like that before." David raised a brow. "Where?" Ben's eyes darkened with something heavy. "Guilt, maybe grief." "Overseas," he said quietly. "A military operation gone bad. A kid was involved. Dog never recovered." David froze. "You were there?" he asked. Ben nodded once. "Yeah, and that." He pointed toward Shadow, who now sat protectively beside Mia, watching her draw shapes in the dirt. "That is the same look he had back then, like he's guarding something precious, something he lost." David felt his stomach twist as Ben's final words sank in. That little girl didn't just calm him. She woke a memory he's been carrying for years. The next morning, the sanctuary felt different. Tense, unsettled, as if every wire mesh post and every grain of dust understood something important was about to unfold. Word had spread overnight. The evaluation team from the military was coming. Their job was simple and brutal. Assess Shadow, determine if he was salvageable, or sign the papers that would end his story forever. Mark paced across the yard, barking orders at the keepers, trying to hide the nerves, tightening his jaw. Make sure the arena is clear. Secure the gates twice. No mistakes today." His voice cracked, sharper than usual. David kept Mia close, his hand gripping hers a little too tightly. She looked up at him, sensing the worry he tried to bury. "Daddy, Shadow is sad," she whispered. He swallowed hard. She wasn't wrong. Inside his enclosure, Shadow wasn't pacing. He wasn't barking. He wasn't snapping at shadows. He was sitting still, silent, ears tilted toward Mia, eyes following her every step. He understood something was happening. He could feel the shift, and he was afraid, not of the handlers, not of the test, but of losing the one person who saw him as more than a monster. The evaluation officials arrived in a government SUV. 3 men in uniforms carrying clipboards, protective gear, and calm, hardened expressions. They had seen hundreds of dogs like Shadow, broken animals, unpredictable animals, animals who rarely made it past this stage. Mark greeted them stiffly. "This is Shadow," he said, gesturing to the large, tense Malinois. One evaluator raised an eyebrow. "This is the one from the Evans case, the child hostage incident." Ben, standing nearby, stiffened but said nothing. "Proceed," the leader ordered. Keepers secured the arena, slamming gates shut, locking chains and forming a wide circle along the fence. David lifted Mia into his arms, stepping back. Far back, Shadow was led inside the arena on a heavy chain. The moment Mark reached for a command gesture, Shadow erupted. His muscles tightened. His teeth flashed. He lunged so hard that the evaluator holding the chain was yanked forward. "That's 1 strike," the evaluator muttered, marking his clipboard. Mark tried again. "Shadow, sit!" Shadow growled, snarled, snapped at the air, panic and trauma mixing into an uncontrollable storm. "That's 2. The men along the fence exchanged grim looks. They all knew what 3 meant. David felt Mia squirm in his arms. "Daddy, he's scared," she whispered. "I know," David murmured, voice shaking. "I know, sweetheart." Shadow lunged again, chain rattling, breath ragged, eyes darting around the arena as if surrounded by ghosts only he could see. "That's—" Before the evaluator could finish the sentence, Mia slipped out of David's arms and ducked under the fence. "Mia!" David shouted, stumbling forward. But she was already running across the arena, tiny boots pounding softly in the dirt, her brown ponytail bouncing with each determined step. The evaluators froze. Mark froze. David froze. Shadow froze. He stopped mid-lunge, claws digging into the ground, chest heaving, eyes locked on the little girl who walked straight into the center of the chaos. "Shadow," she whispered, barely audible. He lowered his head. The evaluators exchanged looks of disbelief. Mia approached him slowly and placed one small hand on his cheek. Just like before, Shadow melted, his body relaxed, his breathing steadied, his wild eyes softened into something gentle, something broken, something hopeful. He sat down perfectly immediately, his posture obedient and calm in a way Mark had never achieved, not even once. One evaluator whispered. "That wasn't training," another nodded. "That was trust." The clipboard slowly lowered. "If this child can handle him," the lead evaluator said quietly, "then this dog isn't dangerous. He's traumatized and she's the only one who can reach him." Mark looked at Mia like she was something out of a miracle story. Ben nodded knowingly, sadness and recognition in his eyes. And David. David stared at his daughter as Shadow rested his head against her knee. He realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. Shadow wasn't just listening to Mia. He was anchored to her. And without her, he would fall apart. When the evaluation ended, the officials walked away, whispering among themselves, shaken by what they had witnessed. Mark stood speechless in the arena, staring at Shadow as if seeing him for the first time. David held Mia close, unsure whether he should praise her courage or scold her recklessness, and Shadow sat calmly at Mia's side, his amber eyes following her every breath. But Ben didn't join the others. He lingered at the far edge of the arena, cap pulled low, shoulders tense, eyes locked on the dog with a haunted familiarity. His silence had weight, an old, heavy kind of weight. And for the first time since he arrived at the sanctuary months ago, David noticed the sadness in the man's posture, like someone carrying a truth he could no longer ignore. Later that afternoon, when the arena emptied and the sanctuary grew quiet, Ben approached David and Mark behind the sheds. His steps were slow, deliberate. "We need to talk," he murmured. Mark crossed his arms. "About what?" Ben glanced toward the pen where Shadow sat watching Mia draw shapes in the dirt, with a stick about him and about what you don't know. David exchanged a wary glance with Mark. "Ben," he said carefully, "you mentioned something yesterday. Overseas, a military operation. What did you mean?" Ben hesitated, jaw tightening. "I wasn't supposed to be there," he began, voice low. "I was a civilian contractor near that schoolhouse compound. We heard gunfire, people running, then soldiers swarmed in." Mark frowned. "You were at the Evans hostage case?" Ben nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw everything." David leaned in, heart thudding. "What happened?" Ben took off his cap, revealing tired, haunted eyes. The insurgent had the little girl trapped. Everyone was panicking. The handler, Evans, shouted for the dog to go. And Shadow, he moved like lightning. His voice cracked slightly. He saved that child. Took down the insurgent in seconds. Mark sighed. "We know that part. The dog got aggressive after that. The military said he snapped." Ben shook his head sharply. No, they got it wrong." David stiffened. "Then what actually happened?" Ben swallowed hard. I was close enough to see her face. "The little girl. When Shadow took down the insurgent, she fell. She wasn't hurt badly, just scared. But when she looked at Shadow, she didn't see a hero. She saw the chaos, the noise, the blood. She screamed, and that scream—" He glanced toward Shadow. "That scream broke him." Mark frowned. "You think that's all it was?" "A scream?" "No," Ben whispered. "It was what came after. The military dragged Shadow away like he'd done something wrong. Evans fought for him, but the higher-ups blamed the dog. The girl's parents blamed him, too." He exhaled shakily. Shadow didn't snap. He grieved. He felt like he failed to protect her. Even though he saved her life, David felt his breath catch. Mark's eyes widened. Ben looked toward Mia, who now giggled softly as Shadow nudged her hand. "That look she gives him," Ben said quietly. "It's the same look the girl should have given him that day. Kindness, trust, safety," he swallowed. "Mia isn't just calming him. She's healing the wound that's been tearing him apart for years." The days that followed were unlike anything the sanctuary had ever seen, where men with years of experience had failed. A 7-year-old succeeded without even trying. And soon, the keepers noticed a pattern. Wherever Mia went, Shadow followed. Not like a guard dog, but like a wounded soul finally finding something worth living for. Each morning, Mia would run toward the pen with her tiny boots kicking up puffs of dust. Before she could even call his name, Shadow would already be at the gate, tail low, ears forward, eyes glowing with a softness no one had ever seen in him. The keepers stopped pretending to look busy. Every one of them watched, breath held, as Mia slipped her hand through the fence to stroke Shadow's cheek. Then the real change began. Mia started practicing commands, not because she was trained to, but because she had seen the keepers do it. Her tiny voice, gentle and steady, carried across the arena. "Sit." Shadow sat instantly. "Stay." He froze like a statue. "Come." He walked, not lunged, not charged, walked to her with perfect obedience. Mark stood nearby with his arms crossed, shaking his head in disbelief. "She's not commanding him," he muttered. "He's choosing to listen." When Mia laughed, Shadow's ears perked up, his tail swishing like he was rediscovering joy itself. When she drew circles in the dirt, he watched like each line mattered more than the world around him. And when she tripped one afternoon, the keepers leaped toward her in panic, only to stop dead as Shadow rushed forward, positioning his body beside her to keep her from falling again. Protective, gentle, attentive. "A dog like that doesn't come around twice," Ben murmured. Every evening, David tried to lead Mia away, worried for her safety. But Shadow always sat at the edge of the pen, watching her leave with a quiet, heartbreaking whine. Even the evaluators returned, stunned by the transformation. "This isn't rehabilitation," one whispered. "This is attachment." And it was true. The more time Mia spent with him, the more the broken shards inside Shadow began to realign. The panic in his eyes softened. The nightmares faded. The trauma loosened its grip. Because Mia wasn't teaching him commands, she was teaching him to trust again. And every man at the sanctuary could see it clearly. Mia wasn't just healing the dog. She was rebuilding him. The sanctuary was unusually quiet that afternoon. The sky had dimmed into a dull gray, the wind low and uneasy, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. Most of the men were busy moving equipment into the storage shed before the weather turned ugly. Mia sat near the arena fence, humming as she braided leaves into Shadow's collar. He lay beside her, calm as ever, eyes half closed in a peace he hadn't felt in years. But peace rarely lasted long around a sanctuary. Inside the large equipment shed, a loose latch rattled violently in the rising wind. A heavy metal gate, one used to pen wild cats, hung crookedly. Mark noticed it too late. A sudden gust slammed the gate open with a deafening crash, and that thunderous sound spooked the young, untamed wolf hybrid tied inside. The hybrid shrieked, rearing high, eyes white with panic. Before anyone could react, it snapped the tether, bolted out of the shed, and thundered straight into the yard. Paws pounding violently, eyes wild, nostrils flaring, straight toward Mia. "Mia, move!" David shouted, dropping the supply crate and sprinting across the yard. But Mia was frozen. The hybrid barreled closer, kicking up dirt in a frantic storm of paws and terror. Keepers shouted, scattering, trying to cut the animal off. Too slow. Shadow saw it first. His ears shot up, his muscles tensed, his eyes narrowed with sharp, unwavering focus. In the next heartbeat, he launched himself forward like a missile. "Shadow, no!" someone yelled, thinking he was charging at Mia. But Shadow wasn't charging her. He was charging for her. The hybrid was seconds away, its claws tearing the ground when Shadow hurled himself into its path with a force no one believed possible. He slammed against the hybrid's front legs, knocking it off balance just enough to redirect its charge. The hybrid stumbled sideways, crashing into a dirt mound instead of the little girl standing helpless in its path. Chaos erupted. Keepers rushed to grab the hybrid. Mark leaped onto the animal's side to steady it. Someone grabbed Mia and pulled her back, but Shadow didn't move. He stood between Mia and the hybrid, body lowered, teeth bared, growled deep and protective, his stance screaming one message: "You will not touch her." David collapsed beside Mia, pulling her into his arms, shaking. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Are you okay?" Mia nodded shakily, eyes wide. "Shadow saved me," she whispered. Mark approached slowly, still breathless. "That dog just risked his life for her." Ben nodded gravely. That's what he was trained to do. Protect the innocent, even at the cost of himself. Shadow finally relaxed, staggering slightly from the impact. Mia wriggled free of David's arms and rushed to him. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. Shadow pressed his head into her chest, whining softly. Not in pain, but in relief. The men exchanged stunned looks. The wild, dangerous, untamable dog had done the one thing no training, no discipline, no evaluation had managed to prove. He wasn't aggressive. He was loyal, ferociously, unquestionably loyal. Mark exhaled shakily. We were wrong about him. Completely wrong. David wiped his eyes, voice trembling. He didn't see a little girl. He saw someone he had to protect. Ben nodded just like before. And as the storm clouds rolled in overhead, one truth settled over the sanctuary like a heavy, breathless revelation. Shadow wasn't broken. He had just been waiting for the right person. The storm broke over the sanctuary that evening, soft rain settling the dust and cooling the air. The chaos of the afternoon still hung heavy in everyone's minds. The runaway hybrid, the near tragedy, and the impossible sight of Shadow throwing himself into danger without a moment of hesitation. But now, as the sky rumbled quietly, the sanctuary felt calmer, almost peaceful. Mia stood beneath the overhang of the shed, wrapped in David's jacket, little boots soaked from the rain. Her eyes never left Shadow's pen. Every few seconds she leaned forward, as if her tiny heart couldn't sit still. Inside, Shadow lay curled in the straw, still exhausted but alert, ears twitching every time Mia shifted. He had refused to rest until she was in sight. David finally knelt beside his daughter. His voice was gentle this time, not panicked, not scolding, just full of something warm and fragile. "Sweetheart," he whispered. "You know that dog? He saved your life today." Mia nodded. "Because I saved his," she said simply. The words hit David like a truth he had tried not to face. She had saved Shadow over and over in ways none of the keepers could. The dog wasn't dangerous. He was devoted. Mark approached from behind, cap in hand. "I spoke to the evaluation team," he announced. "After today, they're not labeling Shadow aggressive anymore." He paused, glancing towards the pen. "They're calling him rehabilitated." David exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "So, he's staying here?" Mark shook his head. "No." Then he looked at Mia with a growing smile. "He's going wherever she goes." Mia's eyes widened. "Shadow comes home." David froze. Shadow perked up instantly, tail thumping against the straw. Mark nodded. He's bonded to her. Keeping them apart would break him again. Mia rushed into the pen before anyone could stop her. Shadow rose unsteadily and pushed his forehead into her chest, wrapping her in the gentlest embrace a dog his size could offer. David watched the scene unfold. The smallest girl and the biggest, most misunderstood dog choosing each other without a moment's hesitation. In that quiet, rain-soft moment, he understood. This wasn't the end of Shadow's story. It was the beginning. The next morning, the rain had washed the sanctuary clean. Sunlight spilled across the fields, turning every puddle into a tiny mirror. And in the middle of the yard, Mia walked proudly with her small backpack bouncing behind her. Shadow trotting beside her. No fence, no chain, no fear, just trust. Shadow stayed close, matching her small steps with gentle ones, constantly glancing at her as if making sure she was still safe. Every keeper paused in their work, watching the pair with softened eyes, the wild military dog, walking like a guardian shadow beside a little girl. David approached slowly, still stunned by how natural they looked together. He crouched beside Mia. "You ready to take him home?" he asked quietly. Mia beamed. "He's my best friend." Shadow pressed his head into her shoulder, as if agreeing. Mark stepped forward, handing David a small folder. His papers are signed. Shadow is officially hers now. He smiled a rare, proud smile. That dog wasn't broken. He was waiting for the person who could see past his fear. Ben tipped his cap. Eyes misty. Some souls, he murmured, aren't meant to be trained, they're meant to be understood. David nodded, lifting Mia into his arms while Shadow circled their legs protectively. For the first time since the day Shadow lost his place in the world, he had a home again. Not a pen, not a unit. A home. Mia leaned down and kissed the top of Shadow's head. You're safe now, she whispered. And Shadow, who once trembled at memories of helicopters and screams, closed his eyes, letting her words settle into the deepest part of him. He wasn't the wild dog nobody could handle. He was the loyal protector a little girl chose, and who chose her back. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.